Welcome to another exciting episode of my channel. This is Dr. Miller. Nice to meet you if I haven't met you already. And if you've been around for a while, I hope you enjoy this video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Videos, a variety of topics, teaching videos, what I'm doing here today, a book review, as well as Journal Club. I'm hoping to put out more of those as I have a little more time. But I'd certainly appreciate you like this video. If you like it, you're more than welcome to watch it first. Okay, so I have an interesting book today. And it's called Estrogeneration. All right? And I'm going to be honest with you, books like these, I tend to just like, I've started and not finished a lot of books that, talked about like thyroid health, but it's not from a real scientific perspective, meaning that there's no receipts to what they're saying. It's just a lot of observational stuff, and I tend to like, okay. So I'm going to be honest, I looked at this book and like, okay, I'll give it a chance. All right. Now, it's written by a MD doctor, Dr. Anthony J, or PhD, I'm sorry, Anthony J. And so again, a PhD doesn't mean anything, an MD doesn't mean anything, but it's a good place to start at least. What this book is about is, you give it a chance is what I'm going to tell you. I gave it a chance, you give it a chance as well. It's heavily cited. Well, it's cited, okay? It's not an academic work, is why I pause to say heavily. But it's cited throughout in research literature up to the current time that the book was written. So it has receipts. It has receipts from government organizations in terms of some of the things I'll talk about in a minute. So that's why I gave it a chance all the way through. And I was, I'm convinced to some degree of whether some of the things are in the book. And any book is a secondary source. So now it's time to go look at the primary sources if I want to really buy into some of this stuff. All right, so in general, what is the book? Well, the book talks about these many sources of estrogen-producing chemicals in our food supply, in our personal health products, and plastics, right? And how these chemicals are linked to increases in estrogen and estrogen-causing effects, especially in males. He uses he's a fisherman, so he uses the fish as because a lot of fish are using some of these research studies. Of seeing some of the malformation of genitals in men and reduction in testosterone. And he's linking many of this to the negative changes we're seeing in men's health and women's health as well, by the way. And also, some of the infertility issues, right? And just generally movement towards effeminacy in men in the United States. The United States is one of the worst when it comes to managing some of these chemicals. Now, I'm not an environmentalist. In the sense of like I'm not an extremist. I'm not Greta Thunberg. I'm not there, and I probably never will be, to be honest with you. But unfortunately, because those voices are so loud and angry many times, it pushes people away. Reasonable people that would say, you know what, there is a problem with the way we're treating our environment. And I'm one of those people. Like I think we haven't managed our environment well. Modernity, for all its good things, and I just wrote a book on modernity because I'm seeing this more and more. Modernity, for all its good things, has some significant side effects. Significant side effects. We've lost, physical activity. We've lost good food. Everything's a space food now. Everything's in a tube. Everything is processed. That's a big statement. Most things are now. And there's a lot of people waking up to this and saying, "Hey, let's go to our local co-op." And yeah, those foods are more expensive, but it turns out they taste better. And if you eat less of them, you don't gain as much weight. I mean, there's connections here. We've kind of lived in a society that is fast and efficient, but we've lost so much in that efficiency. There's a difference between a handmade product and something that's made on a machine by, that 10,000 were made. People pay more for the handmade product. Why? Because it's handmade. There's something about it that's special and different. Well, same thing with food. When you have better food and products, you have better results. It's not a surprise, right? It's worth more. It costs more, but it's worth more. Okay, so let me talk about this book. The first part of the book is just kind of going over some of these chemicals, and he really does. He goes after soy, which I appreciate because I've been looking for. There's lots of a fair amount of research. I'll say a lot on soy, but I like to hear some of these sources. He's pretty hard on soy, as I think he makes his case for it that reducing the amount of soy intake is a really good idea, especially for men and women. He makes a case for E2 in the water supply. I'm just giving a few things he talks about and how. Again, this is a modernity thing, our focus on birth control and the massive amounts of birth control that's consumed in women, well, that's excreted into the water supply. That reclaimed water does not filter out EE2. And so what you're having is populations drinking birth control, including men. And so that could be affecting birth rates. Now, correlation does not equal causation. He does point this out in his book. I'll give him credit. There are other factors why fertility rate has dropped. Like he uses China, for example. China has had a one-child policy for a long time, moved to a two-child policy, but massive amounts of birth control is consumed in China. And it's in the water supply in significant amounts. Now, are Chinese population having less children because they're used to having one child, and so it's hard to break out of that? Or is it because of the water supply? My general kind of view of this book is this is one piece being all the things that he talks about, all these different plastics, all these different mold and in our food supply and all these different factors. I think it's a factor in what we're seeing in terms of negative health outcomes in general, but certainly when it comes to how it affects men. I've had a recent interest in testosterone levels in men and why they're dropping, but I think this is one piece of the puzzle. That's my opinion, okay? Because all we have right now is some really good studies, appears in some really downplayed studies, if you follow his perspective, on how these plastics and environmental factors are affecting fish and some of these things that different organisms have been studied, animals have been studied, they've been kind of downplayed. So we have that, but we don't have these big, long surveillance studies, okay? So that's where you can poke a hole in this and say, well, does it really affect? Biochemically, it makes sense. The EE2, for example, is in the water. Like, there's receipts for that, period. Now, what you have to do is say, how much effect do you think that these things are making on population? And I would go back to modernity has some side effects, and they're significant, and we keep ignoring them. I'm all about business. I'm not against business. I think and certainly I'm not an extreme side of environmentalism, but it's too bad that we like to live in ditches. I'm pro this and I hate that. I'm pro this and I hate that. Well, what if, again, it's a logical fallacy to say that the truth is in the middle, but what if there is some truth in the middle, if it's not right in the middle? Like, hey, we could do better business practices. Hey, you know what? Business is important, and we just need to do it better. We could use your input. I mean, we could talk to each other. Imagine that. Friggin' A. Okay. So the other part of this, thinking through this, and part of his book was the conflict of interest issues in government organizations and business. I thought about, if you haven't seen my review on Dr. Nestle's Unsavory Truth about nutrition industry and conflict of interest, these two books are really rolled together, right? Pointing out some of the significant problems that you're having people dipping their toes in both ends of the thing here. Like, hey, I'm a regulatory agency, but I'm also one that's producing. That's a conflict of interest. Or I'm the researcher and I'm producing. That's a conflict of interest. Again, a lot of this stuff, I like, where's your tinfoil hat? 5 years ago, I told myself, through COVID, I lost a lot of faith in some of our government bodies. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to go much deeper in that, but I lost a lot of faith in how they handle the research literature. And I think history will bear that out. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people were hurt through that. This is why, though, I'm more apt to read some of these things and say, you know what, conflict of interest is more of a significant problem than I ever realized. Dan Barber's book, Third Plate, that I reviewed, does a great job of outlining like how we can live in harmony with the land without being weird about it. Like, you can be modern and enjoy the modern conveniences, but respect the land and respect, the environment, and it produces great yields. We can do things in balance. It's possible, and it shouldn't be a shocker. We're smart. We can do this. We just don't want to, for whatever reason. And I think a lot of it is because we keep pushing back against the other side. So a really good book to kind of work in with those other two if you haven't read those. He does at the end of the book, he gives offers some different plans. Some of he calls them gold, silver, and bronze. What you could do to help improve your environment, right? Meaning, the food you're eating and the products you're using and using glass. And he has an interesting linkage. I need to go look at this research literature because I'm like, interesting. Where taking a sauna will help get out some of these toxins, right? Because you go to get a massage or whatever, the masseuse always says, okay, you're getting toxins out and you drink water. Now there's some truth to that, but he said, there's studies on longevity and the sauna use. Like some of it could be linked to, getting some of these estrogenic compounds out of your fat, right? Because fat stores a lot of stuff. That's why fish are such a contaminated food. Again, that's interesting. I'm going to go read that. I want to go find the primary sources. I'm not ready to commit on all the things he said in the book, but I will say he brought up some really good points and he has receipts. And so I think it's worth considering, not like red dye 40 is such a big problem. It's everywhere. But this stuff gets swept under the rug. He did point out something that I have a hard time with, that I agree with him on this, is we tend to start from the premise of, we're just going to inject something in the food supply, and we just give it this GRAS, generally regarded as safe, moniker, and then it's like, we'll prove that it hurts you. It's like, we'll prove that it doesn't, right? I mean, and that may sound like the same side of the same, two sides of the same coin, but in other words, something should not enter the food supply until it has been proven to be safe. Not, hey, let's put it in this food supply, it appears to be okay. And, the same research we use to say sweeteners are okay, is usually in high dosage given to animals. Well, if we're doing the same thing with these environmental factors and we're getting negative health outcomes, shouldn't we respect that research too? Like again, this is where I think you see maybe some conflict of interest occurring, is you have studies that are saying some of these plastics and some of these environmental factors are causing issues in the animal models they're using. No, we're just going to ignore those, but we'll support the animal models where we can give them a whole bunch of artificial sweeteners and they don't show any negative effects. You can't have it both ways. So I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm starting to sound like one because I'm starting to see things that are hard to ignore. I know this isn't sets and reps, and for some of you, you're like, dude, this is not why I watch your channel, and I understand that. But this is a book I think worth reading in general for its health. He points out, this could be helpful for athletes. If you could limit some of these exposures, it might be helpful. I'm not endorsing all the things he's saying. I'm just saying it's a book that might be worth reading and considering. Okay? I'm being very careful not to go full tinfoil hat here. I want to see receipts, and I want to see them myself before I start to draw definitive lines. But if you read these, the other two books I mentioned together with this one, you're starting to triangulate data. And these are secondary sources, but you're starting to triangulate secondary sources. And then it's like, well, let's look at the primary sources. If you start triangulating those, it's like, this is how science used to be done, right, before we got in our little silos. And you start to develop a picture of what's going on. Then you can make policy out of that. That's how things used to work. Okay. I'm sure there's some things I'm going to forget that I wanted to talk about this book. It's a good book. Just keep your critical thinking skills on and consider some of the arguments. There are receipts in it. It's a well-written book. It gets a little bit in the weeds at times, but it's not too bad. At least something worth considering. It's not, at least it's not a full-blown, like I told you before, heal my thyroid type of thing. You can decide if I'm not saying for weight loss stuff, right? A lot of people say your hormones don't determine if that's true, but your genetics do have a part in how fast you lose weight. And he talks about that a little bit. And I've seen that as a diet coach. I think this is common sense too, that we're all different, and how we, some people get cancer and some people don't. I mean, now the environmental factors, how we eat and things can influence how we express those genes, but we have genes on board that promote one or the other. What's interesting is this, if you buy this argument, Estrogenics, that it can change your genes, which shouldn't be a surprise because we can change gene expression and then pass it on to the next generation. I'm not saying, if you do that over a course of a few generations, yes, you can have changes. That's small e evolution, right? So anyway, worth a book, worth a check out. If you want something a little bit different, worth considering some of the things he proposed as well. All right, I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully you learned this book review, and let's all get our tinfoil hats on together.